As we said, thinking about money in the right way is a difficult thing to do, so we find tricks to think about it the wrong way. And one of those tricks is thinking about money in relative rather than absolute terms. So let me first give you some examples to how to think about it. A very classic and standard example is the following. Imagine you're going to buy a pen, and you find a pen that you like, and that pen is $15. And as you're about to check it, at the cashier tells you, you know what, you have such a lovely face, you have such a lovely smile, I don't want to abuse you, so I'll tell you what. Our competitor sells the exact same pen, instead of for $15, for $7. It's 3 blocks down the street. It's up to you if you want to buy the pen here or go to this other place. And now you can think to yourself, would you walk 3 blocks down the street to save $8 on this pen? And most people, when given this decision, say, yes, I would do that. Now imagine a slightly different case. You're coming and you're buying a camera. It's an expensive camera. It's cost $1,015. And as you're about to check out, the salesperson says, you know what, you have such a lovely face, you have such a lovely smile, I'll tell you what. Our competitor is selling the same exact camera 3 blocks down the street for $8 less. Instead of $1,015 for $1,007. Would you now take the trip down to the other store to buy the camera? And most people now say, absolutely not. Now the reality is that your checking account doesn't care where the $8 came from. They came from a pen, or they came from a camera, or they came from a small amount of purchase or a big amount of purchase. But we care. $8 from 15 looks like a really big amount, more than half. $8 from 1,015 looks like a tiny amount, doesn't seem to be worth it. Or think about the following example. Imagine you're buying a car. You're going to buy a car, the car is $40,000, and the salesperson tells you that for $2,000 more, you could get leather seats. Now, I'm not really sure what the benefit of leather seats are, but let's say that there are benefits for leather seats. And the question is it worth $2,000 when you buy a $40,000 car? Or imagine a second case, you're going to buy a chair for your office. And the salesperson tells you that for $2,000 more, the chair costs $500, and for $2,000 more, you could get a leather seat. Would you do it? Now, for most people, they would say the first one, it's an easy decision. The second one seems offensive. Spending $2,000 more on a $500 chair just to get leather? Now, presumably, you sit more in your office chair than in the car, and whatever the benefits are from leather would be higher in the office than in the car, but that's not how we think about it. You spend $40,000, $2,000 seems very small. You spend $500, $2,000 look incredibly large. And here's another example. If you're like me, a couple of times we've renovated our house. And when you renovate your house, the contractors come and give you an initial price, and then there's all kinds of options for upgrades and changes and so on. And what I found myself doing, and I think it's universal, is making very, very quick decisions on big sums of money. Why? Because the renovation is incredibly expensive. So all of a sudden spending only, extra thousands of dollars on, better tile or French something or another, or Italian or countertops or granite, all of a sudden seems like a good deal. But at the same day that I spend this huge amount of money in a quick decision, I can go to the supermarket and look very carefully, do I want the more expensive tomatoes and the cheaper tomatoes? Which one makes more sense? Now, my whole life of making decisions about tomatoes could not sum up to that snap decision I made a few hours ago with the contractor, but because the amount of money we start with the contractor is so large, it's incredibly easy to make snap, quick decisions. And by the way, all of this also should tell you that there are probably ways to think about how to fight this. That what we don't want to do is we don't want to make a decision based on something relative that we're spending. We want to think about them as independent, and the question is how can we do that? Now these decisions are not just about how we feel about spending money, they're also about happiness. So ask yourself, for example, what would you prefer to be? To be a person who makes $90,000 a year, which is a very good salary, in a company where everybody makes between 90 and 100. So you're making 90, but you're the lowest paid employee, versus to work in a company that pays less, between 60 and 85,000, and you're the highest paid employee. You get 85,000. So in an absolute way, you would get paid less in the second company, but in a relative way, you would be at the top of your game, while in the first company, you would be at the bottom. Now, the interesting thing is when you ask people these choices next to each other, most people say, I'll take the first one. I prefer to get more money and be the lowest paid employee. When you ask people where they would be happier with, most people recognize they'll be probably happy in the second case, will be the highest paid employee, even if they get paid less for it. And this is an interesting question of, yes, we do understand the issue of relativity, and we do understand the influence of happiness, but are we willing to pay a premium for this increased happiness? And the answer is not so much. Now, if you think about all of these examples of relativity, they all come about the fact that we have diminishing returns. We have this function in which our happiness starts very high and then we have diminishing returns. And another way to think about it is that we think in terms of percentages or ratio increases. So think about the following graph. What we have on the x-axis is the amount of money, the physical amount of money, how much is actually involved. And what we have on the y-axis is the psychological intensity of that. Now, because this curve has a diminishing return shape function to it, what does it mean? It means that if we take an amount of money on the x-axis and the left side, or the lower end of the scale, and we take an amount that is exactly the same in terms of the amount of money on the far right, they project very different psychologically. So this is why $8 out of 15, which is represented by the left two columns, look like it has a huge psychological effect between 30 and 40 something on that scale, while $8 on the right side of this scale, even though it has the same $8 effect, psychologically has a much, much smaller effect. And this is basically the way that relativity works, and how diminishing returns works, and why the same physical amount in terms of money has very different psychological implications.